4.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Kiwi.
Well, a report has just been released by Symantec that says only 1 in 10 New Zealanders feel very safe online. However, many do not follow all the precautions to keep themselves safe. And in terms of ethics, 39% of New Zealanders have lied about their personal details online, 38% have used a fake ID online, and 25% have online regrets. However, New Zealanders aren't too bad morally, with 63% saying that downloading music online is illegal and morally wrong, compared to the global average of 45%. And of course, one of the big issues with all this, of course, is identity fraud as well. And it's kind of like one of the hidden crimes, I suppose, as well. And with the internet now basically being an ordinary, everyday part of everyone's lives, it is the place where identity fraud actually happens. And Mimi Johnson, who is a Master of Philosophy at AUT University, has done a thesis on identity fraud in New Zealand. And we're going to be talking about the sort of social and also business and governmental impacts of identity fraud. Mimi joins us this morning. Good morning, Mimi.
Good morning, Glenn.
Are you surprised by any of the findings in this report at all?
Not particularly. I think a few of the statistics are actually quite interesting. It was interesting that 87% of Australians and 86% of New Zealanders think about cybercrime, and I think this is reflective on the increase in usage in society of less face-to-face interactions used in everyday life. Yeah.
There are no surprises at all there, I suppose. I mean, a lot of business is done online now as opposed to face-to-face.
Yes, it is. It's also good to see that 88% of New Zealanders in the report stated they would actually seek professional help if their identity was stolen online. So it indicates there is a greater awareness in New Zealand about the problem.
Yeah.
However, personally, I have seen some New Zealanders who have been a little bit lax in what they've done. For instance, posting things such as images of their New Zealand passports or driver's licences or student ID cards online.
Goodness me.
Yes.
And what sort of forum?
Basically, if you do a Google image search, websites such as PhotoBucket, etc., bring
Wow.
up all sorts of images like that. And it's not just New Zealanders, there are a lot of other people around the world also doing it, but it makes you more exposed and more vulnerable to having your identity stolen.
Golly, what are people thinking? That's just outrageous, isn't it? I mean,
It
is. That's basically just laying it all out there once you do that.
Yeah, pretty much. And some people even accompany their images with personal profiles as well, and that's very dangerous.
Yeah. And of course now social media into that mix, and people are more likely to start sharing their information around.
Yes.
I mean, going back 10 years, 10, 15 years, identity fraud was a lot harder to do, wasn't it?
I think it's always been around, but I think there's become more information in the media about it.
Yeah.
And there have been things put in place in various countries around the world that in the last 5 years, say, that have actually helped prevent identity fraud from occurring. So it is getting a lot harder. New Zealand signed an agreement with Australia in July this year, which means that the immigration agencies in both countries, for instance, will be sharing fingerprint information. So travelling across the borders is going to be a lot more difficult under a false identity.
Let's talk about some of the effects of identity fraud, particularly on the individual. When it becomes apparent that that someone's identity has been stolen, is there a lot of shame involved in that?
I think there is, and people become very angry. They feel very vulnerable, and rightly so as well. You may have heard in the papers, etc., in the past where people have actually stolen, say, a dead child's identity, and this can cause all sorts of pain for the family of that dead child and bring up grief once again that they've already had to get over once before. It's abhorrent that a stranger would have sullied their dead child's name.
Yeah.
In cases where financial harm has come to someone due to debt being raised against their identity, that person has a long and frustrating road ahead of them to prove that it wasn't them that applied for the finance, for instance. Their credit rating could be negatively impacted upon. Their lives essentially need to be put on hold until the situation is sorted out.
Is it actually quite hard to clear your name?
I believe it is. At the end of the day, it all comes down to evidence, and you need to prove that it wasn't you.
So the balance is wrong here. It's too easy to steal and too hard to correct it.
It is. It's very identity fraud is a crime that goes across industries and it goes across borders, and it's a commonly used transnational crime. And it's known as what we call a breeder crime, which means it's often used as a crime in order to facilitate other crimes such as people smuggling, drug trafficking, financial fraud. And at the end of the day, if the police, for example, do not know who committed the crime, it makes it a lot harder to catch the criminal.
Yeah.
And in addition, identity fraud can be committed with speed, while law enforcement cannot always act so quickly. So, it can also be difficult to detect, and victims may not find out until many years later that their identity has been stolen.
So is my identity as a New Zealander quite useful to a spotty-nosed criminal in Russia?
Definitely, it is. The New Zealand passport, I'm not sure if you're aware, but it actually entitles New Zealanders to, I think it's visa-free access with about 52 countries around the world. So it's a very valuable document to an identity fraudster. And if you want to smuggle somebody into another country without too much, focus being put on them and having to apply for a visa, then yes, it's a very valuable document. And New Zealanders worldwide, I suppose, have a reputation as being, good people. And
yeah. And of course, through the internet, we can no longer use distance as an excuse to sort of be a little bit lax about this sort of stuff.
Oh, absolutely not.
So the effects can be quantified more than in just financial terms.
Well, in New Zealand, we don't even have official statistics collated on identity fraud. So I think this is partly due to the fact that we have no specific identity fraud legislation. And we also don't have identity fraud as an official crime classification. So identity fraud offences are often caught up under other offences such as credit card offending, for example. And in New Zealand, there are no concrete financial measures to even say how much this has cost the country to date, for instance.
Wow.
And I'm also not aware of any other report at the moment in New Zealand which measures identity fraud in other ways. So,
Mimi, having done this thesis on identity fraud, how guarded are you personally?
I'm very guarded.
Yeah.
I am.
Do you have a Facebook profile or anything like that?
No, I don't.
No. Yeah, right. And yet, I don't know what the stats are, but it's something like 80% of New Zealanders now have some kind of online profile like that.
That's right, they do. And it's not even so much the hackers that are the problem out there. It's also the security, I suppose, of all electronic data. In 2008, I believe, Ticketek emailed accidentally out 918 of its customers' details. And
also recently, Hell Pizza had their old database stolen online as well.
That's right. In 2009, it was about 6,000 Shell customers in New Zealand and Australia had their details come out into the public.
So even if you think that you're giving a reputable company your details, it's no guarantee that everything is going to be secure.
No, I mean, they can only obviously try as hard as they can to make sure everything is secure, but accidents do happen, and it's not just in New Zealand, it has happened regularly overseas as well.
Best idea is to pull the plug. Is that right? Maybe just disconnect it from the wall.
I unfortunately don't think it's realistic in this day and age, but you do have to be mindful, and the Norton report actually said 88% of us don't use a separate credit card or an email address for online purchases, and maybe we should all start to look towards doing something like that.
Yeah. So
at least you can contain the damage.
And surely a lot of it comes down to common sense.
Absolutely, it does.
Just being sensible. Yeah. Well, Mimi, thanks so much for highlighting some of these issues for us this morning on the show.
Not a problem, Glenn. Thank you.
That's Mimi Johnson, who is a Master of Philosophy at AUT University, looking at identity fraud in New Zealand.